In the far reaches of the galaxy, there was a world covered in black mountains and red deserts. Its name was Vraction, a place where fire met stone and the sky glowed with the light of 3 suns. This world belonged to the dragons, an ancient race that lived in great stone cities built inside volcanoes. Their wings were wide as ships, their scales shining like molten metal. Among them ruled Queen Zara, the mighty dragon queen. Zara was unlike any other dragon that came before her. She was born without hearing. From the moment she hatched, she lived in silence. She could not hear the roar of storms, the cry of battle, or the songs of her people. Yet she saw everything. She watched the world with sharp golden eyes and learned to understand through movement, gesture, and firelight. Her silence made others uneasy, even among her own kind. Some dragons whispered that a queen who could not hear was unfit to rule. But Zara had proven them wrong. When Zara spread her wings, her people followed. When she raised her claw, armies stopped. Her silence had become a symbol of power. She did not need to roar to command her people. Her eyes and actions spoke louder than sound. Still, inside her heart, she carried a quiet ache. The silence that gave her strength also kept her apart from everyone else. She could never hear the laughter of her children, the songs of her people, or the voice of her world. Far away, across the galaxy, other races watched Vraction from a distance. The Galactic Alliance feared the dragons. They were powerful, proud, and slow to forgive. The dragons remembered the old wars, when other races tried to take their planet for its resources. The humans were part of that alliance. They told stories about dragons as monsters and destroyers. To them, the dragons were reminders of a time when fire ruled the stars. But the galaxy had changed. After many years of conflict, peace had begun to spread. The Galactic Council wanted to bring all species together again. The dragons were the last to remain apart. So the council chose to send someone to speak with them, a human who might earn their trust. That human was Captain Ethan Cole. He was a retired Marine who had once fought in the Outer Rim Wars. He had seen planets burn and soldiers fall. After the wars, he grew tired of fighting. He joined the Peace Initiative, hoping to build instead of destroy. When his superiors asked for a volunteer to visit the dragons, no one stepped forward. Most feared they would be roasted alive before they could speak. Ethan did not hesitate. He accepted the mission, saying only, "Someone has to start the first step." Ethan arrived on Vraction in a small silver ship called the Horizon. When it landed near the capital, he stepped out into the burning wind. The ground cracked beneath his boots, glowing with faint lines of lava. In the distance, the great city of Dravakar rose like a crown of fire. Towers of black rock reached toward the red sky, and streams of molten gold ran through them like rivers. Above it all, dragons flew, dozens of them, circling their queen's palace. When Ethan reached the palace, he was greeted by dragon guards. They were enormous, each one taller than a shuttle. Their eyes glowed faintly, and smoke curled from their nostrils. They looked down at the human without a word. One of them, a silver-scaled dragon named Kale, lowered his head and spoke in a deep rumble. "The queen will see you. Follow." Inside the palace, the air shimmered with heat. The walls were carved from obsidian, and glowing veins of crystal lit the halls. At the end of a long corridor stood the throne, a massive seat made of fused stone and bone. Upon it sat Queen Zara. Her wings were folded like a cloak of gold and red, her eyes steady as sunlight. She looked at Ethan as if she could see straight through him. Ethan bowed slightly, unsure what to say. He had trained for weeks to understand dragon customs, but nothing had prepared him for the presence of their queen. He opened his mouth to speak, but Kale raised a claw. "Do not waste your words, human. The queen cannot hear you." Ethan froze. He had read the reports, but hearing it said aloud made it real. The queen tilted her head slightly, studying him. Her claws moved slowly, tracing signs in the air, a language of movement and light. Ethan watched carefully but did not understand. The dragons around him seemed to, for they lowered their heads in respect. Zara's signs ended with a single motion, and Kale translated. "The queen asks why you have come." Ethan took a deep breath. He looked up at Zara, feeling the heat of her gaze. "I come to offer peace," he said softly. "And friendship." Kale repeated his words in the dragon's language. Zara did not move. Her golden eyes flickered like fire behind glass. She turned slightly, her tail curling around the throne. Without a word, she stood and spread her wings. The rush of hot wind pushed Ethan back. The dragons bowed as she rose, leaving through a great opening above the hall. Ethan watched her go, her shape vanishing into the burning sky. He stood alone before the empty throne, his heart heavy. He had traveled across the stars to speak of peace, but how could peace begin when words could not reach her? He looked up at the glowing sky and whispered, more to himself than anyone, "There has to be another way." Captain Ethan Cole spent the next few days on Vraction trying to understand the dragons. The air was always hot and smelled of smoke. The sky was red even at night. He stayed in a guest chamber made of stone, built for human comfort but still larger than any room he had ever seen. Dragon guards watched from outside the door, their golden eyes glowing in the dark. Ethan knew he was safe, but he did not feel welcome. Every morning, he saw the dragons gather in the great hall. They moved with heavy grace, their scales gleaming in the sun. Queen Zara sat on her throne above them, her expression calm and distant. She ruled without sound, her commands passed through small gestures that her people somehow understood. Ethan was amazed by how smoothly her court worked even without speech. Still, the silence between them made him uneasy. Ethan tried to speak with the dragons, but most ignored him. When he asked a question, they only looked at him with confusion or mild annoyance. He felt like an insect crawling across their grand world. The only one who seemed willing to talk was Kale, the silver dragon who served as Zara's guard and translator. Kale spoke slowly, his deep voice rumbling like thunder through stone. "The queen does not trust your kind," Kale said one evening as the two stood outside the palace. "Humans have brought only war and ruin to others. Why should she listen now?" Ethan stared out at the glowing horizon. "Because I'm not here to fight," he said quietly. "I'm here to learn, maybe even to help." Kale studied him for a moment, smoke curling from his nostrils. "Words are easy," he said. "Trust is not." Ethan nodded. He could not argue with that. He had seen too many treaties broken, too many promises fade under the weight of fear. But something about the queen's eyes had stayed in his mind. Even when she had turned away, he had seen curiosity there, and loneliness. The next day, Ethan requested another meeting with Queen Zara. Kale led him into the throne room again. The queen sat high above, surrounded by her advisors. Ethan bowed and spoke clearly. "Your Majesty," he said, "I come from the humans of the Galactic Council. We wish to build peace with your people. We seek understanding, not control." Zara watched him but did not reply. Her claws moved in graceful patterns, signs that Ethan could not read. Kale interpreted them. "The queen asks what peace means to you." Ethan hesitated. "Peace means no more fear," he said slowly. "It means my children and yours can live without war. It means no more blood in the sand." Zara tilted her head slightly. She seemed to be listening with her eyes. Then she lifted her hand again and signed another message. Kale's tail twitched as he spoke the translation. "The queen says peace is a sound she cannot hear. Why should she believe it exists?" Ethan felt his throat tighten. He looked up at her, wishing he could speak in her language. "Maybe you can't hear it," he said softly, "but you can feel it, the same way you feel the warmth of the sun or the strength of the wind." Zara's eyes narrowed. She did not answer. The court remained silent. Finally, she rose from her throne and turned away. Kale motioned for Ethan to follow him out. Later that night, Ethan sat alone on the balcony of his chamber. The stars above Vraction looked strange and distant, dimmed by the red glow of the sky. He thought about the queen's words, about her silence, her doubt. He understood it. She had grown up in a world that never spoke to her, surrounded by voices she could not hear. To her, peace must have seemed like another sound beyond reach. Ethan took out his datapad and began searching through old records. He found fragments of language studies from before the Great Divide, records of an old system called Galactic Sign Language, used centuries ago before sound-based translation became the norm. The files were incomplete, but they showed symbols that matched some of the motions Zara had made. His heart quickened. If he could learn this language, even a little of it, he might be able to speak to her in her own way. For the first time since he had arrived, Ethan felt a spark of hope. He spent the rest of the night studying. He copied the shapes with his hands, repeating them until they felt natural. The gestures were different from human signs, more fluid and circular, as if designed for beings with claws and wings. When dawn came, Ethan was exhausted but determined. He looked out toward the rising suns and whispered, "Maybe this is how it begins." In the grand hall that morning, when Zara entered, Ethan stood among the dragons once more. The crowd fell silent as he stepped forward. The queen looked down at him, her golden eyes curious and cold. Then, slowly, Ethan lifted his hands. He moved them carefully, copying the gestures he had studied all night. His fingers traced the ancient symbols as he formed the message. "I am honored to meet you." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Zara's eyes widened. The hall filled with quiet gasps as the queen lowered her head slightly. She raised her claws and replied with emotion Ethan barely understood. But he knew its meaning all the same. "You understand?" Ethan smiled and nodded. The silence that once stood between them finally began to fade. After that first moment of understanding, the court of Rakshan changed. For the first time, the Dragon Queen had spoken with an outsider, and for the first time, a human had replied in her own silent tongue. The story spread quickly across the palace, whispered from dragon to dragon in deep rumbling tones. Some saw it as a miracle, others called it a trick. But Zara knew the truth. The human had reached her in a way no one ever had. Still, peace did not come easily. The dragons were proud and slow to trust. Even Kale, who respected the queen's decisions, looked at Ethan with suspicion. He could not understand how this small, fragile creature could hold the queen's attention. "Do not mistake her curiosity for friendship," Kale warned him one morning. "The queen tests you. She wishes to know your heart." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's fair. I want to know hers too." In the days that followed, Ethan continued to study Galactic Sign Language. It was not easy. The dragon's version was older, full of ancient symbols and flowing movements. But Zara was patient. When he made mistakes, she corrected him gently, her claws tracing the right signs in the air. Slowly, they began to understand one another. Simple words turned into short sentences. Sentences turned into ideas. And ideas began to turn into trust. Ethan learned that Zara's silence had shaped her rule. She had never heard the voices of her people, but she felt them through their movements and their eyes. She ruled through calm and focus, not fury. Yet, she confessed through signs. There were moments when she longed to hear even a single sound, to know what her world truly felt like. Ethan did not pity her. Instead, he admired her strength. "You hear in ways others don't," he signed back one evening. "You see what they miss." Zara tilted her head at that. Her golden eyes softened, and a flicker of amusement crossed her face. She replied, "Perhaps. But you speak like one who has lost something too." Ethan looked away for a moment. The truth was, he had lost many things. Friends in battle, hope in peace, and faith in leaders who had sent soldiers to die for politics. "I lost my reason to fight," he signed finally. "But maybe I've found a reason to believe again." The queen studied him in silence, then nodded once. For the first time, a faint smile appeared on her scaled face. It was small and almost hidden, but it was real. Not everyone in the court shared their growing understanding. Some dragons, led by a scarred red dragon named Vorn, grew restless. They whispered that the queen's silence had weakened her judgment. They said no dragon should trust a human. Ethan could feel their eyes on him during every meeting. Their claws tapped the floor in impatience as Zara allowed him to speak. He knew that if he made one wrong move, his mission would end in flame. One afternoon, during a gathering of the High Council, the tension broke. Ethan stood beside Kale, translating his words into signs as he spoke about cooperation and trade. But Vorn interrupted with a snarl that shook the chamber. "We need no alliance," he roared. "The humans brought fire to our skies once before. Why should we bow to them now?" Ethan stayed silent, letting Kale respond. But Vorn's anger grew. He turned his burning eyes toward the human. "You think because you wave your hands like one of us, you are one of us?" he spat. "You mock our queen's gift." Zara rose from her throne in a flash of gold and heat. Her wings opened wide, sending a blast of wind across the hall. The firelight danced across her scales as she signed sharply, her motions fast and fierce. The dragons fell silent. Kale's voice trembled as he translated. "The queen says the human honors our ways. He does not mock them. He has learned what we have forgotten." Vorn lowered his head but did not bow. Smoke curled from his nostrils. "Then we are truly lost," he muttered, before storming out of the hall. The silence that followed was heavy. Zara stood still for a long moment, then turned her eyes toward Ethan. Her expression was unreadable, but her hands moved slowly, with care. "They will not all accept you," she signed. "Not yet." Ethan nodded. "I don't need all of them," he signed back. "Just you." Something in his sincerity made Zara pause. She lowered her gaze, her claws curling against the throne. "You are bold for one so small," she replied, almost teasingly. Ethan grinned. "And you're patient for one so mighty." A soft rumble came from her chest, a sound he could not hear but felt through the ground. It might have been laughter. That night, when the halls of Draviker quieted, Ethan stood on the same balcony where he had once felt lost. Now the air seemed lighter. The silence around him no longer felt empty. It felt alive, like the breath of a sleeping giant. For the first time, he believed that true peace between humans and dragons might be possible. But deep in the shadows beyond the city, red eyes watched from the dark. Vorn and his followers were not done. The barrier of silence had been broken, and with it old fears had begun to stir. The next days on Vraction passed with quiet purpose. The dragons had begun to accept that their queen had found something new, a way to speak beyond sound. Some still looked at Ethan with suspicion, but others watched with curiosity as he and Zara continued to communicate through signs. The bond between them grew stronger with every conversation. Each morning, Ethan would enter the great hall where sunlight spilled through openings in the ceiling, painting the black stone floor with golden light. Zara would be waiting for him on her throne, her eyes bright with interest. Their lessons had become more than diplomacy. They were now a shared discovery. Ethan learned that the dragon sign language was far more expressive than any human version. A flick of the claw could mean anger or joy, depending on the tilt of the head. A slow movement of the tail could add tone or emotion to a statement. Zara laughed often. Not with sound, but with her body, her wings shaking slightly when she was amused. Ethan found himself smiling more each day. One afternoon, as they practiced, Zara asked him a question with her claws. "Why do you try so hard to learn?" Ethan paused before answering. "Because I've spent most of my life fighting," he signed back. "And I'm tired of not understanding the ones I fight." Zara's eyes softened. "Understanding is harder than war," she replied. "But it lasts longer." Their silent talks began to draw attention. Younger dragons gathered in the hall to watch. They started copying small gestures, trying to learn the signs themselves. The language that had once belonged only to their queen now began to spread through her people again. The old way of silent speech was returning, reborn through the meeting of two very different beings. Ethan noticed that Zara had started to trust him more openly. She allowed him to walk beside her through the city of Draviker. Together they traveled across wide bridges that spanned rivers of lava and looked down at the hatching grounds where young dragons played. The sight amazed Ethan. "They're beautiful," he signed. Zara nodded proudly. "They are the future," she replied. "They must learn not only to fight, but to listen." That evening, as the twin moons rose over the red horizon, Ethan and Zara stood on the balcony overlooking the glowing city. The air shimmered with heat, and the hum of distant magma rumbled below. Ethan felt a strange peace, unlike anything he had known before. "You have given my people something precious," Zara sighed slowly. "You reminded them that silence does not mean weakness. It can be a bridge." Ethan looked at her hands as she signed, then back into her golden eyes. "And you've reminded me that peace doesn't need sound to be real," he answered. They stood there in silence for a while, the kind of silence that felt full, not empty. But beyond the peaceful lights of the capital, not all was calm. Vorn and his followers had gathered in the volcanic fields outside the city. The red-scaled dragon stood before a ring of others, his eyes burning with anger. "She bows to the human," he growled. "She lets him poison our ways with weakness. This ends now." Another dragon, smaller but fierce, hissed in reply. "The queen's silence has blinded her. The human must be removed." Vorn spread his wings, the heat from his breath making the air shimmer. "Then we will remove him. The queen cannot rule if she forgets what we are." Back in the palace, Zara sensed unrest. The firelight in her throne room flickered strangely, as if the volcano itself was uneasy. She turned to Ethan, who was studying an old text projected from his pad. "Something stirs among my kin," she signed. "A shadow moves beneath our peace." Ethan frowned. "Vorn," he guessed. "He's not finished." Zara nodded. "No, he was never one to bow. I will face him if I must." "Then I'll stand with you," Ethan signed firmly. She looked at him for a long time. "You would fight for a queen who cannot even hear your voice?" she asked. He smiled gently. "I don't need you to hear it," he signed. "You already understand." Zara's gaze lingered on him. For a brief moment, she looked less like a ruler and more like a soul who had been alone for too long. Her wings folded close around her as if to shield that feeling. "Then may the stars watch us both," she signed. Outside, a tremor shook the mountain. The lava rivers pulsed brighter. The dragons of Rakshan were stirring, and soon, the silence that had once united them would be tested by the roar of rebellion. As the sons of Rakshan crossed the sky in their long red arc, the bond between Queen Zara and Captain Ethan Cole deepened. Each day they met in the great hall or on the palace balcony, sharing stories through the silent language that had become their bridge. What began as lessons turned into conversations, and those conversations grew into something like friendship. Ethan told her about Earth. He described the oceans that stretched beyond sight, the forests that whispered with wind, and the snow that fell like quiet stars from the sky. He signed stories of human cities, of light, music, and laughter. Zara listened closely, her golden eyes filled with wonder. She had never seen a sea or a forest. To her, the idea of rain was strange and beautiful. When he spoke of war, however, her eyes darkened. She asked about the battles humans fought, about the reasons behind their endless conflicts. Ethan hesitated. "Sometimes we fight because we're afraid," he signed slowly. "Sometimes we fight because we forget to listen." Zara looked away, the firelight reflecting on her scales. "Fear is a sound I know well," she replied. "It echoes even in silence." Then she told him her own story. When she was young, the dragons had fought the Karth Dominion, a brutal race that sought to enslave them for their fireborn power. Her father had died in the war. Her mother had fallen to the silence of grief, and Zara, still young and unable to hear, was left to rule a world of ash and pain. "My people only respected me when I proved I could lead without sound," she signed. "But strength built only on fear cannot last forever." Ethan watched her hands move with the elegance of memory. He could almost feel the weight of her past in every gesture. "You were never weak," he replied. "You led them when others would have broken." Zara paused. "And yet, I have been alone," she signed. "Even my advisors speak of me, not to me, until you came." The admission hung in the air. Ethan felt something stir in his chest, a mix of pride and sorrow. He knew what loneliness felt like. He had lived it through years of silence after the war, when medals meant nothing and peace felt hollow. "You're not alone now," he signed softly. They stood there, the air between them glowing with the reflection of magma rivers far below. The silence they shared was no longer heavy. It was peaceful, alive with unspoken meaning. Over the next few weeks, their partnership began to change more than just their hearts. The dragons of Vraction noticed their queen's calm, and the humans of the Galactic Council began to listen more closely to her messages. Ethan translated her signs in diplomatic meetings through holographic relays, spreading her wisdom across the stars. For the first time in centuries, humans and dragons spoke with understanding instead of fire. But peace never comes without challenge. Whispers of rebellion reached the Queen's court. Vorn, the red-scaled warrior who had defied Zara before, was gathering dragons who believed the old ways were dying. They saw Ethan as a corrupting influence, a weak creature who had bent their queen's will. Kale warned Ethan late one night. The silver dragon's voice was low but urgent. Vorn is dangerous. He believes the queen has forgotten her fire. He will not stop until he proves her wrong. Ethan nodded grimly. Then we'll remind him that strength doesn't always roar. When Zara heard of Vorn's growing defiance, she faced the news with calm resolve. He fights for what he believes, she signed. But belief without wisdom becomes destruction. Ethan knew what she meant. He had seen it on 100 battlefields. That evening, Zara and Ethan sat together in the observatory at the peak of the palace. The stars shone clearly above the volcanic clouds. Ethan asked her a question that had been on his mind for days. When you speak to me in sign, what do you hear? Zara thought for a long moment before answering. I hear meaning, she signed finally. Not with ears, but here. She touched her chest lightly with one claw. Every motion carries a piece of who you are. That is enough. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He signed back. If I could give you sound, I would. The queen shook her head gently. And if I could, I would give you silence, she replied. So you could see the world as I do. There is peace in it. They looked out across the burning landscape, where lava glowed like rivers of stars. The world of Vraction was harsh, but in that moment it felt alive, beautiful and fragile. Ethan realized that what connected them was not just language, but shared pain and the courage to move beyond it. In that stillness, Zara raised her claws and made a small sign he had never seen before. It was graceful, deliberate, and filled with warmth. Ethan tilted his head, curious. It means hope, she explained. Ethan smiled. Then let's keep it alive. But far below, in the molten valleys outside Dravakar, Vorn's followers prepared for war. They painted their wings with ash and sharpened their claws. The queen's hope had spread, but so had the fire of rebellion, and soon both would collide. The calm days on Vraction did not last. Peace is a fragile thing, and in the deep valleys where the fire of the world ran strongest, rebellion began to grow. Vorn and his followers met under the shadow of the Black Mountains, their scales glowing red in the molten light. They spoke of pride, of lost glory, and of the queen who had forgotten what it meant to be dragon. The queen bows to a human, Vorn growled, his voice echoing through the caverns. She lets a soft creature of flesh and fear whisper in her ear. We were made for fire and war, not peace and silence. The other dragons roared in agreement, their wings shaking the air. Vorn raised his claw and pointed toward the capital. If she will not remember what we are, then we will remind her. The fire of Vraction must rise again. Back in Dravakar, Queen Zara felt the change in the air before the first message even arrived. The volcanoes beneath the city rumbled with unease, and the sky burned brighter than usual. When Kale came to her with reports of gatherings in the southern valleys, she was already standing by the balcony, staring toward the horizon. They come for you, my queen, Kale said. Vorn has gathered hundreds. Zara's eyes narrowed. Then the silence we built will be tested, she signed slowly. Ethan stood beside her. You don't have to face them alone, he said, speaking softly before translating the words into sign. Let me help. Zara turned to him, her expression unreadable. This is our fire, Ethan Cole. It is not your burden. Peace was never my burden either, he signed back. But I took it anyway. For a moment, They simply looked at one another, the warrior and the queen, bound by something stronger than words. Ethan called his crew from orbit. The Horizon, his small but reliable ship, descended through the red clouds, its engines glowing like twin stars. The human crew, trained under the Galactic Peace Initiative, was small but skilled. They had worked with Ethan for years and trusted his instincts without question. When they landed near the capital, the dragons watched from the cliffs. They were wary, but Zara raised her claw to signal that these humans were allies. It was the first time humans and dragons stood side by side on Vraxian soil without weapons drawn. Together, they began to prepare for what was coming. Zara commanded her sentinels to guard the city's edges while Ethan and his team set up a communication relay to link the dragons with the council. Through Galactic Sign Language, Ethan worked with Zara to organize defenses that blended both human strategy and dragon might. The sight of a human giving orders beside the queen was strange, but powerful. As they worked, Zara watched Ethan move among her people. She saw how he treated even the smallest dragonling with respect, how he listened when others would speak. He had earned her trust and perhaps something more, though neither of them dared name it. But across the lava plains, the Karth Dominion had begun to stir. They had heard of the new alliance between humans and dragons and saw it as a threat to their control. Their ships, black and sharp as blades, cut through space toward Vraxian. When the first warning reached the capital, the sky already trembled with the sound of engines. Ethan looked up at the sky, his stomach sinking. "They're here," he said. Zara stepped beside him, her golden eyes shining in the burning light. "The Dominion returns," she signed. "They took my father. They will not take my world." Ethan touched his wrist communicator. "Horizon, prepare for combat. Activate defense shields." Then he looked to Zara and signed. "We'll fight together, like before." Zara lowered her head, her claws moving with slow grace. "You risk your life for another's world. Why?" Ethan thought for a moment, then signed back. "Because peace isn't just yours or mine. It belongs to all of us." As the first explosions lit the sky, the dragons took flight. Hundreds of wings filled the air, blocking out the red suns. Their roars shook the mountains. The humans joined them, their ships weaving between the great beasts like silver birds. It was a sight the galaxy had never seen, humans and dragons flying together, side by side. Kale led the aerial patrols while Ethan commanded from the horizon. Through the holographic link, he signed battle commands directly to Zara, who relayed them to her warriors through motion and light. The Queen's silence became the rhythm of war. When the Karth fleet descended, their dark weapons split the sky. Fire met fire. Dragons spiraled through beams of plasma, their flames cutting through enemy ships. The horizon dove between explosions, firing precision strikes that opened gaps for the dragons to strike. For the first time in history, two species fought not as enemies, but as one. Amid the chaos, Ethan's heart pounded. He saw Zara above the clouds, wings spread wide, her body glowing with heat as she clashed with the lead Karth cruiser. She was magnificent, terrible, and beautiful, a living storm of fire and silence. He knew this battle would change everything. Whether they won or lost, the galaxy would never forget the day the Deaf Dragon Queen and a human warrior stood together against the dark. The sky above Vraxian burned with light and shadow. Dragons and ships fought as one, weaving through smoke and flame. The Karth Dominion's fleet was vast, their black ships blotting out the stars, but the alliance of dragons and humans stood strong. It was a battle unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Ethan Cole's hands moved quickly across his controls aboard the horizon. Through his visor, he could see the chaos unfold. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked to the holographic screen where Queen Zara's image flickered. Even in the heart of battle, she was calm, her golden eyes steady. She signed her commands with fierce precision, her gestures glowing with soft light that pulsed through her armor. Queen's forces advancing from the East Ridge, Kale reported from above, his deep voice cutting through the static. "Vorn's unit. They're fighting the Dominion too." Ethan frowned. "What?" "Vorn's helping us." Kale's reply came after a long pause. He says no invader touches Vraction. Not while dragons still breathe. Ethan smiled faintly. Even rebellion had pride. Below, the mountains shook as the Dominion's ground troops advanced, armored and relentless. Their energy weapons scorched the black rock, sending waves of molten stone into the air. Dragons dove from the clouds, breathing fire that turned enemy lines to ash. Human drones flew between them, creating shields of energy to block the heaviest blasts. The bond between the two species grew stronger with every strike. In the middle of it all, Zara flew higher than any dragon dared. The air shimmered around her, her scales glowing like the heart of a sun. She soared straight into the enemy's flagship, a towering craft shaped like a blade. Her claws tore through its metal hull, and her fire burst through its core. The explosion lit the sky brighter than dawn. Direct hit, Ethan shouted. She did it. But as the light faded, he saw something else. An energy pulse building deep within the Dominion's command ship. His sensors screamed warnings. No, they're overloading the reactor. They'll destroy the planet. Zara hovered in the air, her wings beating slowly as she saw the glow spreading across the enemy fleet. Ethan opened a channel, signing as fast as he could. Zara, you have to pull back. They're trying to take you, and Vraction with them. Zara stared at the distant light, her jaw tightening. If they burn my world, they burn with me, she signed firmly. Ethan slammed his fist on the console. Don't you dare. He switched the horizon to full speed, breaking through the clouds and into open sky. Kale, get the queen out of there, he ordered. But Kale's voice came through heavy with static. She won't leave. She's going to stop it herself. Zara rose higher. Her wings spread wide as the Dominion's flagship began to crack. The overload energy shimmered like lightning between the stars. She knew what she had to do. She turned her gaze to Ethan's ship far below and signed one final message through the comms feed. Thank you, human warrior. You gave me a voice. Ethan's breath caught. No, don't. But she was already flying into the heart of the light. The blast that followed tore through the sky. It wasn't sound that filled the air, but silence, deep and endless. The explosion turned night into day, and every dragon, every human, looked up in awe. The Dominion fleet vanished in the fire, their ships breaking apart like dust in the wind. The horizon was thrown into a spin. Ethan fought the controls, barely keeping the ship from crashing into the molten ground below. His crew shouted orders, but all he could see was the fading glow in the clouds. Then, through the smoke, a shape emerged. Wings tattered, scales scorched, but alive. Zara fell from the sky, crashing into the ridge near the capital. Ethan's heart leapt. She's alive. He landed the horizon nearby and ran through the ash toward her. The heat was unbearable, but he didn't stop. When he reached her, she was breathing slowly, her great eyes half open. You stopped them, he said softly, kneeling beside her. She looked at him, then signed weakly, together. He smiled, tears in his eyes. Yeah, together. The dragons began to gather around their fallen queen. Even Vorn landed nearby, lowering his head in respect. The war was over. The Dominion was gone. And for the first time, the fire of Vraction burned not in anger, but in unity. That night, as the stars returned to the sky, Ethan stood beside Zara's resting place at the palace. She was recovering, her scales still glowing faintly with the memory of battle. He looked up at the stars, where fragments of the Dominion fleet still drifted in silence. For once, the silence felt right, and in that stillness, he whispered a promise that needed no voice. We'll rebuild. Together. The sun rose gently over Vraction, painting the black mountains in soft red light. For the first time in years, the sky was quiet. The air still carried the scent of ash and metal, but beneath it, there was peace. Captain Ethan Cole stood on the balcony of the palace, watching the dragons soar above the city. They flew not in battle formation but in graceful patterns, their wings catching the morning light. For the first time, their roars were not calls of war. They were songs of honor. Queen Zara rested on the great terrace below. Her wings were scarred, Her scales dulled from the battle, but her eyes shone with strength. The healers had done all they could. Her body would recover, but the effort she had made to save her world had taken much from her. When Ethan approached, she turned her head and smiled faintly. He smiled back, his hands already moving in sign. "You should be resting," she answered with slow movements. "A queen does not rest while her people rebuild." Ethan laughed softly. "You sound like my commander." Zara tilted her head. "And did your commander win his wars?" "Not all of them," Ethan replied. "But he tried." They both looked toward the horizon, where smoke still rose from the valleys. The remains of the Karth Dominion's ships lay scattered across the plains. Dragons and humans worked together to clear the wreckage. The sight made Ethan's chest tighten with pride. The galaxy had changed because one human dared to listen. Kale approached, his silver scales glinting in the light. "Queen Zara," he said, bowing his head. "Vorn has come." Zara's expression remained calm. "Let him." Vorn landed with a heavy thud. His wings were torn, and his eyes burned with something between shame and respect. For a long moment no one spoke. Then he lowered his head deeply. "I was wrong," he said, his voice rumbling through the air. "The human fought with the heart of a dragon. And you, my queen, fought with the wisdom of 1,000 fires. I will follow you again." Zara watched him for a long time before replying in sign. "We do not fight to be followed. We fight to be understood." Vorn nodded slowly. "Then teach me to understand." Ethan smiled. The words of peace that had once seemed impossible were now taking root. The dragons were learning to listen not through sound, but through meaning. Days passed and the rebuilding began. Humans and dragons worked side by side, repairing cities and sharing knowledge. Galactic engineers taught the dragons how to harness energy more safely, while the dragons taught the humans how to shape molten rock and withstand the heat of the planet. It was not easy, but it was progress. Ethan spent his evenings with Zara, continuing their lessons in Galactic Sign Language. What had once been a bridge between two beings had now become the foundation of a new culture. Across the galaxy, embassies began to adopt the language as a universal form of peace communication. They called it the silent tongue of Vraction. One evening, as the twin moons rose above the horizon, Ethan stood beside Zara again. "The council wants to name this alliance," he said. "They asked what you would call it." Zara thought for a moment before signing, "Harmony." Ethan smiled. "I like that." He turned to leave, but she stopped him with a gentle motion. "You could stay," she signed softly. "Your world calls you, but so does this one." Ethan looked around. The dragons soaring overhead, the children playing near the lava pools, the quiet hum of a world reborn. "I came here as a soldier," he said, "but maybe I'll stay as a friend." Zara's eyes gleamed in the fading light. "Then you will always have a home here." The wind carried a faint heat from the mountains as the two stood in silence, watching the stars begin to appear. Somewhere beyond them, the galaxy still turned, still full of fear, hope, and the endless chance to change. And on a world once known only for war and fire, a new dawn had begun. The Queen of Silence and the human warrior had rewritten the Song of Vraction, not with sound, but with understanding.